Almost everyone has done this. You finish dinner, put the leftovers in the refrigerator, and the next day you heat them up until they're steaming hot. Most people believe that if the food is hot enough, it's completely safe to eat. It sounds reasonable, and it's a habit practiced in millions of homes every single day. But what if that assumption isn't always true? What if, for a few common foods, the biggest concern isn't whether they're warm enough, but what has already changed inside them before you ever press the reheat button? This isn't about creating fear or telling you to throw away every leftover meal. It's about understanding something that many people have simply never been taught. In some foods, the combination of cooking, cooling, storing, and reheating can trigger chemical changes that aren't obvious by looking, smelling, or tasting the food. These changes happen quietly, and over time they may become more important than most people realize. Research continues to show that diet plays a significant role in long-term health, including the risk of certain cancers. While no single food causes cancer by itself, and no single meal determines your future health, the choices we repeat day after day can make a meaningful difference over the years. I'm Dr. William, and in this video I'll walk you through 4 everyday foods that deserve a closer look before you reheat them. These are foods many families keep in their kitchens and eat every week. In fact, the last one is often considered one of the healthiest foods you can eat, which is exactly why it surprises so many people. As we go through each food, I'll explain what actually happens during storage and reheating in clear, simple language. My goal isn't to overwhelm you with complicated science. It's to help you understand what's happening so you can make informed decisions in your own kitchen. One more thing before we begin. This isn't about food poisoning or getting sick right after a meal. The concern we're discussing today is much quieter than that. It's about small chemical changes that can build up over months and years through everyday habits that most of us never think twice about. Let's start with the first food on the list. Before we look at the first food, there's one important point to understand. The problem isn't the microwave itself. It isn't the oven either. Reheating food doesn't automatically make it harmful. What matters is what happens to certain foods after they've been cooked, stored, and then heated again. Once food has been prepared, it doesn't simply stay the same until the next meal. During storage, natural chemical changes continue to take place. When that food is heated a second time, some of those changes may continue or become more noticeable. In other words, the concern isn't just the heat. It's the entire process of cooking, cooling, storing, and reheating. This is why scientists have spent years studying how repeated heating can affect different types of foods. Their goal isn't to tell people to avoid leftovers altogether. Instead, it's to better understand which foods may change the most and how those changes could affect long-term health. These findings have also led to recommendations from respected scientific and public health organizations. They continue to encourage safer food preparation and storage practices, not because every reheated meal is dangerous, but because small, everyday habits can add up over time. Perhaps the most surprising part is that this discussion isn't limited to processed foods or obvious junk food. Some of the foods we'll cover today are widely considered healthy and are recommended as part of a balanced diet. Yet under certain conditions, even those foods can change in ways that most people never expect. That's exactly why it's important to look beyond whether a food is simply healthy or unhealthy. How it's handled after cooking can matter just as much. And with that in mind, let's begin with the first food on our list. Before we get into the first food, I'd like to explain where this information comes from. As a physician, I've learned that good health advice should never be based on rumors, social media trends, or fear. It should be based on careful research, reliable evidence, and a clear understanding of how the body responds over time. Everything I'll share in this video is grounded in findings from published scientific research. These studies have helped us better understand how certain foods can change after they're cooked, stored, and reheated, and why those changes may deserve more attention than many people realize. While researchers continue to learn more every year, the evidence we have today already provides valuable guidance for making safer everyday choices. My goal isn't to convince you to stop eating leftovers or avoid foods you've enjoyed for years. That's not the message here. In fact, many of the foods we'll discuss are nutritious and can absolutely be part of a healthy diet. The important question isn't whether you should eat them, It's whether you're handling them in the safest way possible after they're cooked. I also don't want this conversation to create unnecessary worry. Fear rarely helps people make better decisions. Understanding does. When you know what can happen during storage and reheating, you're in a much better position to make simple adjustments that fit naturally into your daily routine. So as we go through each food, I'll keep the explanations clear and practical. I'll explain what researchers have found, why it matters, and what you can do with that information. The purpose isn't to make your life more complicated. It's to help you use the foods you already enjoy in a safer and more informed way. Now that we've covered the foundation, let's take a closer look at the first food on our list. Before we look at each of the 4 foods, there's one more concept that will make the rest of this video much easier to understand. The first time a meal is cooked usually isn't the main concern. Cooking is a normal part of preparing food, and in many cases, it's exactly what makes food safer to eat. The changes we're talking about today happen later, after the food has been cooked, allowed to cool, stored for a period of time, and then heated again. That entire sequence matters. During storage, food doesn't simply pause until the next meal. Small chemical changes continue to take place, even while it's sitting in the refrigerator. When the same food is reheated, some of those reactions may continue, and others may become more significant. That's why we're focusing on the complete process, not just the second round of heating. As we go through today's 4 foods, you'll hear me mention 3 scientific processes more than once. Don't worry about memorizing complicated terms. I simply want you to recognize the basic ideas behind them. The first is oxidation. This is a natural chemical process that can affect certain fats and other components of food over time, especially after cooking and storage. The second involves compounds that can develop during repeated heating as food continues to undergo browning and other heat-related reactions. These changes don't happen all at once, but they may become more noticeable when food is cooked and reheated multiple times. The third process involves nitrate-containing foods. Under certain storage and reheating conditions, these compounds may continue changing into other substances that researchers have studied for many years. These 3 processes are the foundation for everything we'll discuss next. You don't need to remember every scientific detail. Just keep in mind that different foods can change in different ways after they've been cooked, stored, and reheated. With that foundation in place, let's begin with the first food on our list. Let's begin with one of the most common foods in the world, rice. Whether it's served with vegetables, chicken, seafood, or eaten on its own, rice is a staple in millions of households. It's also one of the foods people are most likely to cook in large batches and reheat later. For many families, that's simply part of a normal routine. The good news is that reheating rice isn't automatically dangerous. The bigger issue isn't the reheating itself. It's what happens between the time the rice is first cooked and the time it's reheated. After rice is finished cooking, it shouldn't be left sitting at room temperature for long periods. During storage, especially if the rice isn't cooled and refrigerated properly, certain bacteria can multiply. Some of these bacteria are capable of producing toxins as they grow. This is where many people misunderstand the risk. They assume that heating the rice again will solve the problem. While reheating can destroy many living bacteria, it may not completely eliminate toxins that have already formed during storage. In other words, once those toxins are present, simply making the rice hot again may not fully reverse what has already happened. That's why food safety experts place so much emphasis on how cooked rice is handled after the meal is over. The time between cooking and refrigeration is often just as important as the reheating step itself. There's another reason rice deserves attention. Beyond food safety, researchers have also looked at the chemical changes that can occur when starchy foods are repeatedly exposed to heat. Rice is rich in starch, and every cycle of cooking, cooling, and reheating has the potential to change its chemical structure little by little. These changes don't mean reheated rice suddenly becomes toxic after one meal. They also don't mean you should stop eating leftovers altogether. The point is that repeated heating may gradually increase the formation of certain compounds that researchers continue to study for their possible effects on long-term health. This is why the complete process matters more than any single step. It's not simply about using a microwave. It's about how the rice was stored, how long it remained outside the refrigerator, how many times it has been reheated, and whether that cycle is repeated again and again. Fortunately, reducing these risks is usually straightforward. If you prepare extra rice, allow it to cool promptly instead of leaving it on the counter for hours. Store it in the refrigerator as soon as it's appropriate to do so. When you're ready to eat it again, reheat only the portion you plan to use instead of warming the entire container over and over. Repeated reheating creates unnecessary cycles that are best avoided whenever possible. If you know the rice has been sitting out too long, or you're uncertain about how it was stored, it's safer not to take the chance. Food that doesn't look or smell unusual isn't always free from harmful changes. Rice remains a healthy and practical food for most people. The goal isn't to remove it from your diet. The goal is to handle it in a way that preserves both its quality and its safety. Small habits, practiced consistently, often make the biggest difference over time. Now that we've covered rice, let's move on to another food that surprises many people when it's reheated. The second food on our list may surprise you, because it's often recommended as one of the healthiest sources of protein you can eat. Chicken is lean, versatile, and part of countless balanced meal plans. It's a food that doctors and dietitians frequently include in healthy eating recommendations, and for good reason. So let me be clear from the beginning. Chicken itself is not the problem. Eating cooked chicken as part of a balanced diet is perfectly reasonable for most people. The question we're looking at today is much more specific. What happens after that chicken has already been cooked, stored, and then reheated again, especially if that process is repeated more than once? When chicken is first cooked, heat naturally changes the structure of its proteins. That's a normal part of cooking and one of the reasons cooked chicken is easier to digest than raw poultry. But those proteins don't necessarily remain unchanged forever. During storage and additional heating, they continue to undergo subtle chemical changes. As cooked chicken is reheated again and again, researchers have observed further changes in protein structure, along with the formation of additional heat-related compounds. These aren't changes you can recognize by taste, smell, or appearance. The chicken may still look perfectly normal. Yet at the microscopic level, the food is no longer exactly the same as it was when it first came out of the oven or off the stove. This doesn't mean that reheating chicken one time automatically makes it unhealthy. That's an important distinction. The concern is the repeated cycle of cooking, cooling, storing, and heating over and over again. Each additional cycle creates another opportunity for these chemical changes to continue. Over the years, scientists have studied how repeated heating affects proteins in foods such as chicken. Their work has focused on understanding how certain compounds form during this process and whether long-term exposure to these changes may have health implications. While research continues to evolve, these studies have provided valuable insight into why repeated reheating deserves more attention than many people realize. The key point is that the quality of the food isn't determined only by its ingredients. It's also influenced by how the food is handled after it's prepared. Even a nutritious food can gradually change when it's exposed to repeated heating over time. Fortunately, the practical solution is simple. If you cook extra chicken, divide it into meal-sized portions before refrigerating it whenever possible. That way, you only need to reheat the amount you plan to eat instead of warming the entire container again and again. Reducing unnecessary reheating helps preserve both the quality of the food and minimizes repeated chemical changes. It's also a good idea to avoid making leftovers go through multiple heating cycles over several days. The fewer times cooked chicken is reheated, the better. Good storage practices and thoughtful meal planning often make a much bigger difference than people expect. So the message here isn't to stop eating chicken. It's to recognize that repeated reheating is different from reheating once. Understanding that difference allows you to enjoy this healthy source of protein while making smarter choices about how it's prepared and served. If you think that's surprising, the next two foods are even more unexpected. In fact, they're foods that many people consider among the healthiest options available. Yet under certain conditions, they can also change in ways that most people never see coming. Now let's move on to the third food on our list. And this is where many people are genuinely surprised. Leafy green vegetables are among the healthiest foods you can eat. They're rich in important nutrients, support overall health, and are consistently recommended as part of a balanced diet. If you ask almost any doctor or dietitian what foods people should eat more often, leafy greens will almost always be near the top of the list. So this isn't a conversation about avoiding vegetables. Far from it. The real question is this: what happens when cooked leafy greens are stored overnight and then reheated the next day? The answer has less to do with the vegetables themselves and more to do with the natural compounds they contain. Many leafy greens naturally contain nitrates. On their own, nitrates are a normal part of these vegetables and are not the reason health experts recommend limiting them. The concern begins only under certain storage conditions after the vegetables have been cooked. As cooked greens sit in storage, natural chemical changes can continue to occur. During that time, some nitrates may gradually be converted into nitrites. This process doesn't happen instantly, and it doesn't mean every serving becomes unsafe. It's simply one of the chemical changes researchers have been studying for many years. When those vegetables are heated again, additional reactions may occur. Under the right conditions, some of these compounds can continue changing into other substances that have attracted scientific attention because of their potential effects on long-term health. This is exactly why you'll hear experts focus not only on what we eat, but also on how food is prepared, stored, and reheated. The vegetable itself isn't the problem. The way it's handled after cooking can influence how its natural compounds change over time. Researchers have investigated these reactions for decades. Their work has helped explain why food preparation and storage are considered important parts of healthy eating. While scientists continue to study the details, the overall message has remained remarkably consistent. Proper food handling matters, even for foods that are otherwise considered highly nutritious. That doesn't mean every reheated serving of spinach, kale, or other leafy greens is harmful. It also doesn't mean you should stop eating them. In fact, these vegetables remain an excellent part of a healthy diet for most people. The important point is to avoid assuming that a healthy food always stays exactly the same after it's been cooked, stored, and reheated. Even foods with outstanding nutritional value can undergo chemical changes when they're handled improperly. Fortunately, the solution is simple and practical. If you cook leafy greens, prepare an amount you're likely to eat within a reasonable time. Store leftovers promptly in the refrigerator instead of leaving them at room temperature. When you're ready to eat them again, reheat only the portion you plan to finish rather than warming the same container over and over. Reducing repeated heating helps limit unnecessary chemical changes while preserving the quality of the food. These are small habits, but they're easy to build into your routine. They don't require expensive equipment or complicated meal plans. They simply involve paying a little more attention to what happens after the meal is cooked. And now we've reached the final food on today's list. It's probably the one most people least expect, because it's often described as one of the most complete and nutritious foods available. That's exactly what makes the last example so important. We've finally reached the fourth and final food on today's list. If you remember the beginning of this video, I mentioned that the last item would probably be the most surprising. That's because it's a food most people associate with excellent nutrition, and they're absolutely right. Eggs are one of the most nutritious foods you can eat. They provide high-quality protein, essential vitamins, minerals, and many other nutrients that support overall health. For most people, eggs can be an excellent part of a balanced diet. Nothing we're discussing today changes that fact. The question isn't whether eggs are healthy. The question is what happens after they've already been cooked, stored, and then reheated multiple times. Like the other foods we've discussed, the concern isn't the first time they're cooked. It's what can gradually change as they go through repeated cycles of cooling, storage, and reheating. One of the main changes researchers have studied involves the fats naturally found in eggs. Over time, and especially with repeated exposure to heat, some of these fats can undergo oxidation. This is one of the same chemical processes we mentioned earlier, and it's a reaction scientists have examined in many different types of foods. Cholesterol, which is naturally present in eggs, has also been the subject of research in this area. When cooked eggs are reheated again and again, cholesterol may undergo additional chemical changes as it's repeatedly exposed to heat. Researchers continue to study these reactions to better understand their possible role in long-term health. The proteins in eggs can also continue changing after the first cooking process. Each additional heating cycle may further alter their structure. These changes aren't something you can see with your eyes or notice by taste alone. A reheated egg may look perfectly normal, while subtle chemical reactions continue at a microscopic level. That doesn't mean reheating an egg once is automatically harmful. It's important to keep that distinction in mind. The discussion here is about repeated reheating over time, not about enjoying leftovers the next day when they've been handled properly. If there's one lesson that connects all 4 foods we've discussed today, it's this: repeated heating matters more than many people realize. Every additional cycle creates another opportunity for natural chemical changes to continue. While each individual change may seem small, they're the reason researchers encourage thoughtful food handling rather than repeated reheating whenever possible. Fortunately, the practical advice is simple. If you cook eggs in advance, store them promptly in the refrigerator after they've cooled appropriately. Reheat only the portion you plan to eat instead of warming the same batch several times. If possible, prepare amounts that are likely to be finished within a reasonable period rather than keeping cooked eggs through multiple reheating cycles. These aren't difficult changes to make. In fact, they're the same kinds of habits that support good food safety overall. They help preserve both the quality of the food and reduce unnecessary changes that can occur during repeated heating. So the takeaway isn't to avoid eggs. Eggs remain one of the most nutritious foods available. The real message is to respect how they're handled after cooking. A few simple habits can help you continue enjoying them while reducing unnecessary exposure to repeated heat-related changes. Now that we've looked at all 4 foods, let's step back and talk about what these examples have in common and the simple lessons you can take into your own kitchen every day. After looking at all 4 foods, one thing stands out to me. The disappointing part isn't that this information is new, it's that so many people have simply never had it explained in a clear and practical way. Think about how often these situations happen. You cook extra rice for tomorrow's lunch. You prepare several chicken breasts for the week. You save leftover vegetables after dinner. You boil eggs ahead of time because they're quick and convenient. These are everyday habits. Most people do them without giving them a second thought. And that's exactly the point. People aren't making these choices because they're careless. They're making them because no one has ever explained that the way food is handled after cooking can be just as important as the food itself. I also want to emphasize something that's easy to misunderstand. The goal of this video is not to tell you to stop eating rice, chicken, leafy greens, or eggs. All 4 can absolutely be part of a healthy diet. The real message is much simpler. Understanding how to store and reheat these foods properly allows you to keep enjoying them while making smarter choices in your everyday routine. It means that sometimes small changes in daily habits are the ones that make the biggest difference over the long run. Before we finish, let's quickly bring everything together. Today we looked at 4 very common foods: rice, chicken, leafy green vegetables, and eggs. Each one presented a different reason to pay attention after cooking. With rice, the biggest concern was proper storage and the possibility that toxins may already have formed before the food is reheated. With chicken, we discussed how repeated heating can continue to change the structure of proteins and contribute to the formation of heat-related compounds. With leafy greens, we looked at how naturally occurring nitrates may continue changing during storage and after reheating. And with eggs, we talked about the oxidation of fats and cholesterol, along with continued changes in proteins when cooked eggs are heated multiple times. Although these foods are different, they all share one important lesson. The issue isn't the food itself. All 4 can be part of a healthy diet. What matters is how they're handled after cooking. Proper cooling, safe storage, and avoiding unnecessary reheating can make a meaningful difference. In many cases, it's not about changing what you eat. It's about changing a few simple habits that help you get the most from the foods you already enjoy while reducing unnecessary risks over time. The good news is that protecting yourself doesn't require major changes. Cook only what you're likely to eat. Cool leftovers promptly and store them properly in the refrigerator. When it's time to eat again, reheat only the portion you need instead of warming the same food multiple times. These are simple habits, but they can help reduce unnecessary risks. Small changes in how you handle food today can make a meaningful difference over time. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 4 foods surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, please consider sharing it with someone in your family or a friend who regularly reheats leftovers. A small piece of information can sometimes make a lasting difference. And remember, the goal isn't to fear food. It's to understand it a little better so you can make smarter choices, one meal at a time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.